All seekers sooner or later stumble that our great creative mother, while she amuses us with apparently working in the broadest sunshine, is yet severely careful to keep her own secrets, and in the spite of her pretended openness, shows us nothing but results. She permits us, indeed, to mar, but seldom to mend, and like a jealous patentee, on no account to make. Now, however, Aylmer resumed these half-forgotten investigations, not, of course, with such hopes or wishes as first suggested them, but because they involved much physiological truth and lay in path of his proposed scheme for the treatment of Georgiana. As he led her over the threshold of the laboratory, Georgiana was cold and tremulous. Aylmer looked cheerfully into her face, with intent to reassure her, but was so startled with the intense glow of the birthmark upon the whiteness of her cheek, that he could not restrain a strong convulsive shudder. His wife fainted. "Aminadab, Aminadab!" shouted Aylmer, stamping violently on the floor. Forthwith there issued from an inner apartment a man of low stature but bulky frame, with shaggy hair hanging about his visage, which was brimmed with the vapours of the furnace. This personage had been Aylmer's under-worker during his whole scientific career, and was admirably fitted for that office by his great mechanical readiness and the skill with which, while incapable of comprehending a single principle, he executed all the details of his master's experiments. With his vast strength, his shaggy hair, his smoky aspect, and the indescribable earthiness that encrusted him, he seemed to represent man's physical nature, while Aylmer's slender figure and pale intellectual face were no less apt as typical of the spiritual element. "Throw open the door of the boudoir, Aminadab," said Aylmer, "and burn a passion." "Yes, master," answered Aminadab, looking intently at the lifeless form of Georgiana, and then he muttered to himself, "If she were my weight, I would never part with that birthmark." When Georgiana recovered consciousness, she found herself breathing an atmosphere of penetrating fragrance, the gentle potency of which had recalled her from her death-like stillness. The scene around her looked like enchantment. Aylmer had converted those smoky, dingy, sombre rooms, where he had spent his brightest years in recondite pursuits, into a series of beautiful apartments, not unfit to be the scheduled abode of a lovely woman. The walls were hung with gorgeous curtains, which imparted the combination of grandeur and grace that no other species of adornment can achieve, and as they fell from the ceiling to the floor, their rich and ponderous folds, concealing all angles and straight lines, appeared to shut in the scene from infinite space. For aught Georgiana knew, it might be a pavilion among the clouds, and Aylmer excluded the sunshine, which would have interfered with his chemical processes, had supplied its place with perfumed lamps emitting flames of various hues, but all uniting in a soft, empurpled radiance. He now knelt by his wife's side, watching her earnestly but without alarm, for he was confident in his science, and felt that he could draw a magic circle round her within which no evil might intrude. "Where am I? I remember," said Georgiana faintly, and she placed her hand over her cheek to hide the terrible mark from her husband's eye. "Fear not, dearest," exclaimed he. "Do not shrink from me. Believe me, Georgiana, I will even rejoice in this single imperfection, since it will be such a rapture to remove it." "Oh, spare me," sadly replied his wife. "Pray do not look at it again. I never can forget that convulsive shudder." In order to soothe Georgiana and as it were, to realize her mind from the burden of actual things, Alma now put into practice some of the light and playful secrets which science had taught him among its profounder laws. Airy figures, absolutely bodiless ideas, and forms of unsubstantial beauty came and danced before her, imprinting their momentary footsteps on beams of light. Though she had some indistinct idea of method of the optical phenomena, still the illusion was almost perfect enough to warrant the belief that her husband possessed sway over the spiritual world. Then again, when she felt a wish to look forth from her seclusion, immediately as if her thoughts were answered, the procession of external existence flitted across her screen. The scenery and the figures of actual life were perfectly represented, but with the bewitching yet indescribable difference which always makes a picture, an image, or a shadow so much more attractive than the original. When weary of this, Alma bent her eyes upon a vessel containing a quantity of earth. She did so, with little interest at first, but was soon startled to perceive the germ of a plant shooting upward from the soil. Then came the slender stalk. The leaves gradually unfolded themselves, and amid them was a perfect and lovely flower. "It is magical," cried Georgiana. "I dare not to touch it." "Nay, pluck it," answered it. Alma. "Pluck it, and inhale its brief perfume while you may. The flower will wither in a few moments, and leave nothing save its brown shade vessels, but hence may be perpetuated, a race as ephemeral as itself." But Georgiana had no sooner touched the flower than the whole plant suffered a blight. Its leaves turned coal black as if by the agency of fire. "There was too powerful a stimulus," said Alma, thoughtfully. To make up for this abortive experiment, he proposed to take her by ways of light, striking upon a polished plate of metal. Diana assented, but on looking at the result was affrighted to find the features of the portrait black and indefinable, while the minute figure of a hand appeared where the shade should have been. Alma snatched the metallic plate and threw it into a jar of corrosive acid. Soon, however, he forgot these mortifying failures in the intervals of study and chemical experiment. He came to her flushed and exhausted, but seemed invigorated by her presence, and spoke in glowing language of the resources of his art. He gave a history of the long dynasty of the alchemists, who spent so many ages in quest of the universal solvent by which the golden principle might be elicited from all things vile and base. Alma appeared to believe that, by the plainest scientific logic, it was altogether within the limits of possibility to discover this long sought medium. But he added, a philosopher who should go deep enough to acquire the power would attain too lofty a wisdom to stoop to the essays of it. Not less singular were his opinions in regard to the elixir vitae. He more than intimated that it was at his option to concoct a liquid that should prolong her life for years, perhaps interminable, but that it would produce a discord in nature, which all, and chiefly the counsellor of the immortal nostrum, would find cause to curse. "Alma, are you in earnest?" asked Georgiana, looking at him with amazement and fear. "It is terrible to possess such power, or even to dream of possessing it." "Oh, do not tremble, my love," said her husband. "I would not wrong either you or myself by working such inharmonious effects upon our lives, but I would have you consider how trifling in comparison is the skill requisite to remove this little hand. At the mention of the birthmark, Georgiana, as usual, shrank as if a red-hot iron had touched her cheek. Again Aylmer applied himself to his labors. She could hear his voice in the distant furnace room, giving directions to Aminata, whose harsh, uncouth, misshapen tones were audible in response, more like the grunt or growl of a brute than human speech. After hours of absence, Aylmer reappeared and proposed that she should now examine his cabinet of chemical products and natural treasures of the earth. Among the former, he showed her a small veil, in which he remarked was contained a gentle yet most powerful fragrance, capable of impregnating all the breezes that blow across a kingdom. They were of inestimable value, the contents of that little vial. And so, as he said so, he threw some of the perfume into the air, and filled the room with piercing and invigorating delight. "And what is this?" asked Georgiana, pointing to a small crystal globe containing a gold-colored liquid. "It is so beautiful to the eye that I could imagine it is the elixir of life." "In one sense it is," replied Aylmer, "or rather the elixir of immortality. It is the most precious poison that ever was concocted in this world. By its aid I could apportion of the lifetime of any mortal at whom you might point your finger. The strength of the dose, would determine whether he were to linger out years or drop dead in the midst of a breath. No king on his guarded throne could keep his life if I, in my private station, should deem that the welfare of millions justified me in depriving him of it." "Why keep such a terrifying drug?" inquired Georgiana in horror. "Do not mistrust me, dearest," said her husband, smiling. "Its virtuous potency is yet greater than its harmful one. But see, here is a powerful cosmetic with a few drops of this in a vase of water. Freckles may be washed away as easily as the hands are cleansed. A stronger infusion would take the blood out of the cheek, and leave the rosiest beauty a pale cross." "It is with this lotion that you intend to bathe cheek?" asked Georgiana anxiously. "Oh no," hastily replied her husband. "This is merely superficial. Your case demands a remedy that shall go deeper." In his interviews with Georgiana, Aylmer generally made minute inquiries as to her sensations and whether the confinement of the rooms and the temperature of the atmosphere agreed with her. These questions had such a particular drift that Georgiana began to conjecture that she was already subjected to certain physical influences, either breathed in with the fragrant air or taken with her food. She fancied likewise, but it might be altogether fancy, that there was a stirring up of her system, a strange, indefinite sensation creeping through her veins and tingling, half painfully, half pleasurably, at her heart. Still, whenever she dared to look into the mirror, there she beheld herself pale as a white rose, and crimson birthmarks stamped upon her cheek. Not even Aylmer now hated it so much as she. To dispel the tedium of the hours which her husband found it necessarily to devote to the process of combination and analysis, Georgiana turned over the volumes of his scientific library. In many dark old tomes she met with chapters full of romance and poetry. They were the works of philosophers of the Middle Ages, such as Albertus Magnus, Cornelius Agrippa, Paracelsus, and the famous friar who created the prophetic brazen head. All these antique naturalists stood in advance of their centuries, that were imbued with some of their credulity, and therefore were believed and perhaps imagined themselves to acquire from the investigation of nature a power above nature, and from physics a sway over the spiritual world. Hardly less curious and imaginative were the early volumes of the Transaction of the Royal Society, in which the members, knowing little of the limits of natural possibility, were continually recording wonders or proposing methods whereby wonders might be wrought. But to Georgiana the most engrossing volume was a large folio from her husband's own hand, in which he had recorded every experiment of his scientific career, its original aim, the methods adopted for its development, and its final success or failure, with the circumstances to follow to which either event was attributable. The book, in truth, was both the history and emblem of his ardent, ambitious, imaginative, yet practical and laborious life. He handled physical details as if there were nothing beyond them, yet spiritualized them all, and redeemed himself from materialism by his strong and eager aspiration towards the infinite. In his draft, the weirdest cloud of earth assumed a soul. Georgiana, as he read, reverenced Aylmer and loved him more profoundly than ever, but with a less entire dependence on his judgment than heretofore, much as he had accomplished. She could not observe that his most splendid successes were almost invariably failures. If compared with the ideal at which he aimed, his brightest diamonds were the merest pebbles, and felt to be so by himself, in comparison with the estimable gems which lay hidden beyond his reach. The volume, rich with achievements that had won renown for its author, was yet as melancholy a recorder as ever mortal hand had penned. It was the sad confession and continual exemplification of the shortcomings of the composite man, the spirit burdened with clay and working in matter, and of the despair that assails the higher nature at finding itself so miserably thwarted by the earthly path. Perhaps every man of genius in whatever sphere might recognize the image of his own experience in Aylmer's journal. So deeply did these reflections affect Georgiana that she laid her face upon the open volume and burst into tears. In this situation she found by her husband. "It is dangerous to read in a sorcerer's book," said he with a smile, though his countenance was uneasy and displeased. "Georgiana, there are pages in that volume which I can scarcely glance over and keep my senses. Take heed lest it prove as detrimental to you. It has made me worship you more than ever," said she. "Ah, wait for this one success," rejoined he, "then worship me if you will. I shall deem myself hardly unworthy of it. But come, I have sought you for the luxury of your voice. Sing to me, dearest."